several public listed companies. He is presently the Managing Director of TriLogic and also on the Board of Trustees of the Malaysian Institute of Economic Research and on the advisory panel to the Asian Strategy and Leadership Institute, ASLI. He is a Fellow of the Economic Development Institute, World Bank, Washington, D.C. Today, we are so very honored to have him here with us. So please join me in welcoming Dato Dr. M. SHANmughalingam, author of Marriage and Mutton Curry. Doctor?
Thank you, Anna, for that very generous introduction. The staff of Yayasan Hasanah, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the honor and the privilege of addressing such a distinguished audience. I'm going to tell you a story. If you're mathematically inclined, there are going to be more than one story. Fortunately, they are short stories. In Malay, as you know, they are known as cerita pendek or cerpen. If I follow the same tradition, instead of short stories, I should say short stop to follow the cerpen tradition. Now I shall make it even shorter by only reading extracts from the short stories. As King Henry VIII said to his wives, I shall not keep you long. Catalina Rembuyan wrote that she never read a better foreword than the royal one by His Royal Highness Sultan Nazrin Shah. Among the 5,000 plus who bought the book, many must have done so because of the royal foreword. They heard there might be some stories attached to the foreword. So I'm lucky. I shall begin with story number 1, Victoria and her kimono. It is set in the transition between British Malaya and the Japanese occupation. Ramanan told his headmaster, Dr. Lewis, that his forefathers had crossed the seas in the late 19th century on the strength of a telegram. Work arranged, come! Armed with an English education, these workhorses helped to develop the land of coconut milk, rubber tree milk, tin and tinned milk, buffaloes, cows, and goat milk. Ramanan, also the tiger of the Victoria Institution, introduced his class to Oliver Twist, Tales Retold for Easy Reading, by the world's greatest novelist, Charles Dickens, who of course was British. So grateful were the students that they nicknamed him after the chief villain in the book, Bill Sikes. Ramanan got wind of this, but no confirmation. One day he offered the normal run of essay topics. My pet, Muhammad Ali, inspired, began, my pet is a dog named Bill Sikes. That first sentence confirmed Ramanan's suspicions about his nickname. He charged up to Muhammad Ali and lifted him bodily from his seat. Oh, your dog's name is Bill Sikes? I shall go to your house straight after school today. I shall call out for Bill Sikes just once. If your dog does not dash out answering to that name, God help you, I shall give you a good flogging. No, sir, the dog won't come out, sir. And why not? He died last night, sir. Then show me where you buried him. Cannot, sir. And why not? He is missing. Presumed dead, sir. A bit of a rogue you are. Ramanan twisted his ruler around the flesh on Muhammad Ali's buttocks as the latter winced. How old are you? 13 years, sir. 13 years of what? 13 years of wasted life, sir. The tiger was satisfied. The nickname Bill Sykes died as promptly as the dog did, never to be heard again. The British Empire marched on as Ramanan sat marking exam scripts in the classroom. Index number 67 had knotted his answer script on the right, such that Ramanan could not turn the page over. He asked his class monitor to locate the culprit. Several minutes later, index number 67 turned up. Careless wretch! What's your name? Liu Fukyu, sir. Ramanan jumped up, kicking his own chair to amplify his rage. It was an act he had picked up from his wife. Are you scolding me or telling me your name? No, sir. Yes, sir. Make up your mind. Is it a yes or a no? No, sir. I'm not scolding you, sir. Yes, sir. That's my name, sir. It transpired that Fukyu was not only the son of another VI teacher. For this reason alone, Ramanan pretended not to overhear Fukyu telling his classmates, my uncle, very rich man. When he was in a restaurant in New York, he brought out his own chopsticks to eat spaghetti. A waiter quickly came up to the table and asked my uncle, want a fork, sir? My uncle said, me Malayan, eat first, then fork, lo. Ramanan was with his colleagues in the staff room. This rain reminds me, he began, during a heavy downpour, of the telegram my father used to send to his district officer. Rain so heavy, stop. Whole district flooded, stop. Bridge absconded, full stop. But that, continued Ramanan, was less astounding than when he requested compassionate leave. Wife died, stop. Request emergency leave to go to the crematorium to fire her, full stop. And that was itself nothing compared to the altercation with an expatriate officer in the Federal Treasury. This fledgling questioned my father's request for boots for his staff as part of the malaria eradication program with the retort, does your department prepares to stamp out malaria literally? But was he a match for my father's quick reply, needed for eradication of sarcastic treasury officials who should be stamped out literally? Ramanan was in the staff room. He spoke about his father's system of grading leaders. Well above average ones were ranked able men. An able man ranked higher than a mere Mr. Able, thus starting the double A rating above the A. An even more able man rated triple A as the first vowel was stretched to an able man. You lent emphasis by raising your eyebrows and head. The higher, the more able the leader was. Among the AAA, there had to be one supreme one. Since there were no stopwatches to record this, which of the AAA able men there was a unique title for him. The greatest of all the able men was crowned a capable man. I hereby dub you a capable man, Dr. Lewis told Ramanan. Ramanan was out walking back from seeing what he could find in the market when a military truck loaded with coconuts passed him and stopped at the crossroad in front. A group of soldiers jumped down from the truck and began unloading wooden poles from the rear. They hammered these into each corner of the road. Ramanan froze when he saw flies swarming around the poles. He recognized a few of the faces. They were decapitated heads. Thank you. That's story number 1. Victoria and her kimono. Now we move on to story number 2, Money Man. I'm going to tell you another story. I'm now Sir Peter Cargill, newly recruited director of the World Bank. I shall call on the finance minister, then the deputy prime minister Tun Razak, and finally on the prime minister Tunku Abdul Rahman. Bevan, my officer in Malaysia, accompanied me to the finance minister's parliamentary speech. He tells me that the minister was such a straight arrow. During his undergraduate days at the University of Malaya in Singapore, he regularly won the 100-yard dash, but was equally regularly disqualified for the 220-yard sprint because the latter required the athletes to curve around an oval track, but the minister kept running straight. I asked for a translation of certain words. I was told that the finance minister had spoken entirely in English. His delivery rather resembled a speed train, syllables rushing past to form new and unexpected words. Constitution became conscience, and multilateralism became. A man who has no time to waste is an admirable reflection of the finance ministry's tight control of every aspect of the economy. However, Bevan relates that Siva, his treasury contact, is also the minister's speech writer and under instruction to help brandish the minister's verbal prowess. Bevan tells me that Siva's only disappointment with his job was that the size of his salary did not match that of his vocabulary. Vigorous nodding by the minister helps reassure me that I won handsomely on points during our prolonged handshake. I grin all the way back to my hotel until Bevan, more familiar with local customs and personalities than I, informs me that the minister's nods meant only, I hear what you're saying, and gave away nothing as to his attitude on what was being said. The Deputy Prime Minister, Tun Razak, dressed austerely in a grey bush jacket, gives no quarters and fires a starting volley across my bow. With all due respect, the World Bank is far too slow. Even the turtles on our east coast move much faster. Our civil servants have supplied so much data to your bank that if it had been water to the farmers instead of paper to Washington, we wouldn't have to wait for the Muda Dam at all. Since the Deputy Prime Minister has taken such a hard line with me, I have to prepare for the worst at my summit meeting with the Prime Minister himself. Bevan tells me a story that makes me take my measure of the man I will face tomorrow. On one occasion at Parliament, the opposition leaders had thrown a challenge to the Prime Minister and the government benches saying they were all full of sinners. The opposition leader challenged any one of them to stand up if they had not sinned. The Prime Minister then said he was standing up, not because he had not sinned, but to reply on behalf of the ruling alliance party. He said that if the opposition leader had never sinned, the Prime Minister felt sorry for him. There was applause, thunderous from the ruling party side, and even giggles from the opposition. When another opposition member proposed that adulterers should be stoned, the Prime Minister replied, there weren't enough stones in Malaysia to fulfill that objective. So that is my task. Master fine detail while preparing to handle an astute verbal athlete. I arrived early at the Prime Minister's office wearing one of my favorite ties, regimental, not old school, to convey a military frame of mind, not one of pals and chums. A military-looking gentleman with a clipped moustache brushes past me. Who was that? I asked the Prime Minister's secretary. He replies softly, leaning forward. Our Foreign Affairs Minister, known for his short temper. I believe he wanted to confront our Prime Minister for publicly contradicting a major foreign policy statement he had made. Oh, what will be the outcome of such an engagement of two heavyweights? I asked him. No fire will come out in the meeting, he says. When I ask him why, he says, our Prime Minister tells me ahead of time, to inform the Prime Minister that our Prime Minister had to leave in a great hurry for an urgent and sudden appointment. But what if the Foreign Minister doesn't believe you and peeps into the inner sanctum? Our Prime Minister will hide under his desk in case the Foreign Minister peeps in. He whispers with fingers folded over his lips. I shake the Prime Minister's hand and immediately launch into a summary of my findings before either of us even has a chance to sit down. Mr. Prime Minister, as for the Muda irrigation project, there are a number of issues. Let me elaborate, please. I tick off key points one by one, gesturing with a fountain pen I hold in my hand for greater emphasis. The Prime Minister raises his hand suddenly. Is this a sign of surrender? Has my catalogue of facts brought down his defenses? I usually play golf in the morning. He smiles, removing his cigarette from under the sparse tracing of his moustache. Might I have misheard him? In order not to lose my advantage, I press on with greater vigor. Let me give you some further examples, sir. The Prime Minister continues as if he had not heard me at all. Unless it rains in the morning, then I play my golf in the evening. I'm certain that I'm hearing rightly, even though I can't believe it. This is not the response I'm expecting. When I pause, the Prime Minister responds at last. You have met my deputy and my finance minister. Should I repeat what they've already told you? By the way, do you take sugar with our Cameron Highlands tea? I don't. My people say I'm already too sweet. Actually, it's my diabetes. The Prime Minister raises his teacup. I watch the blue-black ink soaking into my white cotton trouser, where my sterling silver fountain pen, had hit my thigh on its way from my hand to the floor. The meeting is clearly at an end. I'm left wondering precisely who can only run in straight lines. I need to see the finance minister again before I leave. Thank you. We move on now to story number 3, Rahman's American Visitor. We have an American among us. No? From America.
Please.
Okay. I hear only one word from his lips. Facilities. I'm ready for Mr. Malone, loan officer of the World Bank. I'm honored to give you a time-saving verbal tour of the Treasury's facilities. You see this telephone? If I dial 99, my peon will rush in, almost like dialing 999, for emergencies. Ready to bring me and you, since you're my guest, a cup of hot coffee with milk and sugar mixed together in advance. We are very advanced people. The facilities. If I proceed to dial 99, my clerk will pop up with draft replies. He will proofread my letters, improving the drafts so that they look really good. I'm on top and he's on tap. So correspondence goes out tip top. The facilities, Malone clears his throat again as he shifts in his chair. Hold your horses, as we say to you Americans with your colorful cowboy history. To think that just a few months ago, I was a mere undergraduate waiting at the bus stop trying to thumb lifts. Now I have people under my thumb. How thumbs have changed. So have you come to the right place about facilities? By the way, Mr. Malone, are you here alone with some loan facilities? Mr. Malone thumps his forehead with the heel of his palm. He pulls out his handkerchief and mops the perspirations between his bushy eyebrows. He slams his briefcase on the table. Excuse me, Mr. Raymond Arab Dollar. Your tour of the facilities is most awesome, I swear. All I really need to know is, we need to read the story to find out. We move now to the next story, number 4. Seek and shall ye find. Sir, I've been robbed. Robbed? Tan Sri looks at me over his spectacles, resting on his cheeks. Yes, Tan Sri. What is supposed to be mine has been snatched from me. I push errant strands of hair back into my white turban with my mother's multi-purpose 4-multimeter short knitting needle. Above all, sir, if I don't get this promotion, I shall become the laughingstock of the Sikh community. Oh, why is that? Tan Sri Abdullah sits up. What have they got to do with this? They have already given me a lavish subscription dinner to celebrate my sure to get promotion. I worry some may ask for a refund of their subscription. How to face them again, Tan Sri? Now that I have the chief's full attention, I deliver my Paka line as casually as I can. By the way, sir, I met my uncle, Ganga Singh Master. I believe you know him? Tan Sri blinks. He's your uncle? I'm very fond of him and hold him in high regard. He was my favorite English teacher. Yes, both in UI, Tan Sri, were his star students. Later, Nizam says to Tan Sri, here's the appeal from Santok Singh of the Treasury. Yes, the nephew of my ex-VI teacher, Ganga Singh Master. He's a hard-working officer, Tan Sri, Nizam says. I remember my school days. Ganga Singh Master, big, terrifying, but helpful. He reminds me of my English lesson. He beat out the rhyme of the ancient mariner with the familiarity of a chapati maker, one palm slapping the other as he chanted in sing-song gusto. Tan Sri's voice grew louder. It is an ancient mariner. He stoppeth one of three. By thy long grey beard and glittering eye, now wherefore stoppest thou me? That's the end of story number 4. Next, story number 5, his mother's joy. I'm the happiest of all mothers. I know how you love dumplings, Mrs. Chong. I raised a Pyrex bowl to her. What is the good news, huh? She takes last bites of many dumplings. A Malaysian civil service officer. How many mothers can celebrate the awarding of an MCS ship to their own son? This very select group are the ice cream of all ice creams. Cream lala cream or something Frenchified. Why Mandarins? Many of them don't speak Mandarin. Mr. Chong and I can what? The other Chinese there talk chop chop in Cantonese or Hokkien. All of them talk in legalese. Siva's father said, our leaders complained that the MCS under the British time was neither Malayan nor civil and didn't provide much service to us. Now how different? Mrs. Chong asked. Our suns are shining and so are our stars. Mrs. Kandaya, Mrs. Chong says, I know a civil serpent born in the year of the golden snake. One day he hopes to be the king cobra of his department more. Every snake will have his year, he claims. I must finish my household chorus before my husband returns. Otherwise, he'll accuse me of playing mahjong all day. He says if I do good housewife keeping, then he'll be a good housewife keeper for me. Chorus? So you sing while you work? I too have to hurry, Mrs. Chong. I must withdraw my money before the post office closes. As I queue in the post office, a lady with a headscarf returns my smile. Makcik, my treasure from the MCS has been posted to the treasury. Now he can be my treasure. We ordinary people understand a few ringgit and cents. He deals in millions. What is your influential son's name? The increasingly wide-eyed kitten holding on to a headscarf asked me. Siva, after our Lord Siva, the most powerful of all our gods. Many people say God willing before they promise to do anything. But in the government, they are more specific. They say treasury willing. I must tell my husband about your son. Not just your husband, your family, relatives, friends, neighbors. I wave my hand so fast that I must seem to her as many-handed as Lord Siva himself. Weeks later, one Sunday morning, I'm in the wet market with Siva. Son, that's the gentle lady I met at the post office last month. I recognize her too. Did you meet her at the post office? No, Amma, at the treasury. What is she doing there? Seeing her husband. Her husband? What is his business at the treasury? He works there. Oh, as what? I too have to find out. I pun tak tahu. Next, we move to a different story. Story number 6. Flowers for KK. I have been dying inside for 8 years. Yet my 3/4 dead body is sitting at the funeral of my late husband. I'm using my handkerchief not to wipe away my tears, but to hide how few I have left. Almost all of them have been used up in my 8 years of marriage. Another woman beside me is wailing away. I feel twice betrayed. First by my late husband, Kanagaratnam, alias King Kana or KK to family and friends. And second to my younger sister, Tangachi, whose treachery was worse. As soon as our relatives leave, I'll have more than a word with Tangachi. Om Namo Namo Namo. Om Namo Namo Namo. Om Namo Namo Namo. Om Namo Namo Namo. It was at my papa's funeral. How I wept then. Since I'm too numb and stunned to weep, will I explode later? Tangachi, watch out, I said to myself. I lower my handkerchief to stare at Tangachi. I recall the November evening of dark clouds and thunder a year ago, when King Kana pointed his forefinger as he told me, Indra, you've been childless for so long. He said, you, not we. I just served him his evening Ceylon tea, strong with freshly boiled milk, with 1 teaspoon of honey, accompanied with kolkata. KK demanded that every cup of tea be served with sweet delicacy, the way his mother used to serve his father and him. That evening, we were both seated in the sitting room. He spread out in the sofa, his arm resting on his favorite, made in England, lily white linen cushion from Robinson's, and I on my brown rattan chair with my self-embroidered beige cushion. I must do something, he jabbed the cushion. Now it was I, not you or we. It was him or me. Him against me. You know our custom. Which one? I folded my arms. You know where the husband marries the childless wife's younger sister? Oh, that one. I was deliberately casual. I thought the wife had to die first before the husband remarried. Not necessarily, he continued later with gritted teeth. If she has not been productive for many years, that's some kind of death. It's your duty to bear children. So you're planning to proceed as if I'm presumed dead? I asked. Sarcasm gave me some consolation. KK flung his cup of hot tea against the showcase where our wedding portrait and other photos were displayed. Raising his voice, which he did whenever his argument was weak, it's your fault that I have to marry Tangachi. We are keeping it within the family, KK said, as he noticed my reddened eyes. I had wanted to ask whether all the world's darkest secrets weren't kept within families? Aren't most wounds caused by ourselves or within families? My kolkata had bypassed his heart to reach his stomach, which he was stroking. He felt it was manlier to show prosperity instead of chest pain. Many a time, KK rushed home from work, bringing with him piping hot vadai served with red chili and green mint coconut chutney, as well as sweet purple yam porridge, showing how excited he was to have bought all that Tangachi craved for. KK brought some over to my room, and I had to pretend not to notice that they were cold leftovers from Tangachi's tea time treat. Thank you. That was the dark story number 6. And you'll be glad to hear I'm now down to my last story, number 7. Rani taxis away. The aroma of the pandan leaves hits my nose as I take deep, joyous breaths. An older lady standing next to me tells that the kueh seller, Tuan Haji Noor, with his white cap and shirt and his green sarong, is particularly proud of his kueh talam. He demonstrates this pride not only by his regular attire, similar color schemes, but also by painting the roof of his house santan white and the outer walls down pandan green. My eyes are engrossed in the kueh frenzy. A familiar voice intrudes to pull me back to earth. Hello, Ronnie. What are you doing here? It's Mrs. SV. Strong views, Kandeya. I'm buying kueh, Mrs. Kandeya, I stammer. Are you here alone? No, Chandran's with me. Chandran? Who's he? My taxi driver. Mr. Kandeya gives Chandran such a glare that he remains silent looking down. Remember the Malay proverb, Paga makan padi? This paga is trying to eat the rice paddy it should be protecting. Come, I'll rescue you immediately from this cunning kidnapper. What an irony. It's not Chandran, but this busybody, Mrs. Kandeya, who's kidnapping me. Mr. Kandeya stops his car at our front gate. Mrs. Kandeya gets out. Mrs. Chinia, you won't believe what I saw at the kueh stall. I saw your Rani with a strange man in Kampam Baru. Is this true, Rani? Amma glares at me. Amma, I just asked Chandran to take me to buy kueh for the family. Mrs. Kandeya tells Amma, I just saved your daughter's honor from that man. He's taking her to out of the way places. No, Mrs. Kandeya. I know you have a keen sense of rumor. But it's true. Chandran is the taxi driver we arranged to take her to school and back. Mrs. Kandeya raises her eyebrows again. It's much safer than letting her travel alone in public buses. Our young men will be up to monkey tricks. Monkey tricks? Donkey tricks. What do you think your crocodile Chandran is up to? Has he been charming you also with his kueh tricks and treats? Then as the French Queen Marionette Anthony or something said, let him eat kueh, since you won't be feeding him his daily bread. That's what our convent nuns taught us. I don't know any French queens, Mrs. Kandeya, but Chandran was well recommended to us. Which fool recommended him? We have to find out. Thank you very much. I have just one question for you before the moderator pummels me with his questions. Among the extracts that I read out, was there any that you liked from number 1 to 7? Or which one did you like or disliked least?
Especially like the civil serpent bit.
Sorry?
I especially like the civil serpent bit.
Oh, okay. I was a civil serpent myself, but I hope servant. Thank you. Anybody else? You're a very silent audience, in contrast to me. Sorry? The weather.
All right, thank you, Dato Shan, for the delightful presentation.
Pleasure.
Let's put our hands together once again for Dato Shan. Now, if Dato may remain on stage, we'll proceed to the next part of today's agenda.
Thank you.
If I may call upon, he's already here, our moderator, Amirul Muhammad, Grant Manager here at for our Arts and Public Spaces Impact Area, to lead the presentation. Over to you, Amirul.
All right. Thank you so much, Anna.
Hi, Dato Shahira. Oh,
Thank you, Dato, for coming. Yeah, maybe if we could get another big round of applause to Dato Shan. Yeah. So he did to us. We have an honor to host Dato Shan today. And thank you so much, Dato, for the dramatized reading of the 7 short stories earlier. Okay. So maybe I'll just share a little bit about my experience when I also read the book, and I also shared with Dato Shan yesterday that I managed to read 3 of the short stories. But when I started reading MMC, Marriage and Mutton Curry, I feel the warmth of the stories because you managed to cover very little details of what happened during your childhood through the stories of the characters in the short stories. Really, I really like it. And from the different topics, Japanese occupation, diplomacy, red tapes, to the intricacy of the cultural details of what happened in back then Malaya, right? To the family values, I really like it. So maybe for the Q&A session, what we will do is I will ask some of the questions, and I will also take turn with the rest of the floor to ask the question. So we will take turn to ask Dr. Shan the question, and we will make this session more engaging as possible. Okay? All right. So my first question to Dato would be maybe your upbringing, your personal story, because I want the audience to know about what was the inspiration that made you to become a writer. When did you first realize that you want to be a writer, and what is your favorite part of being a writer?
thank you. That's a tough question, but I'll try. I lived in government quarters for clerks. So these government quarters, they had very thin walls, and people didn't whisper. So I could hear my neighbors speaking, my mother talking to my neighbors, to our aunts. And I was a kid, so they thought, what does this kid know? So I was allowed to eavesdrop on everything. And in my head was all this dialogue of my mother, my aunties, my neighbors talking. So I think that was the first inspiration, that all this dialogue was in my head. And they were saying peculiar things and funny things. And sometimes they were talking behind people's back, and they were doing things that I thought I shouldn't do when I grow up. But they were gossiping.
Okay.
So I thought this dialogue is waiting to jump out of my head into a piece of paper. And those days I wrote on lined paper with pencil or pen. So that was one. Then when I was in my secondary school, the Victoria Institution, where some of the stories in the book are set, including the first one, Victoria and Kimono, I wrote articles for the school magazine first. And later I thought, all these stories in my head, I'm just writing factual articles. Why don't I turn them into stories? So the inspiration was the dialogue I heard from the government quarters, and then the feeling that I want to write more than just articles, factual articles. So why don't I write the stories based on the dialogue that I'd heard? Plus, throughout my childhood, I was a voracious reader. The only thing I did was read. I wasn't good at sports or anything. So my only option to spend my time was reading. So I was a voracious reader. And I started off reading superhero comics, and then classics comics, and then fiction, poetry, plays, and so forth. So I read right across the board, and so much of that reading is also in my head. So there's this dialogue from the linked government quarters, there's what I learned from school, and then from the many books I read. And because we were very poor, I couldn't afford to buy books. So the books that I read were from the school library, the public library, British Council, US Lincoln Library, the KL Book Club. And these library books you have to return within 2 weeks. So I read very quickly because after I have to return, not like I was rich enough to own books and I could read at my leisure. So I was a voracious, I read so much. So all that is in my head. And I thought I'll go beyond writing articles to write stories. And I wrote stories based on actual events that I saw happening and added a little bit of salt and pepper of my imagination. But they were based on real life events. Like Money Man is based on what happened when I was in the Treasury. The World Bank director came, he saw my minister, then he saw Tun Razak and he saw Tunku. And he thought he went to 3 different planets. They were so different, the 3 people. The guy was so confused at the end, you know.
Yeah.
And we had 3 parallel types of government, the Ministry of Finance, the Deputy Prime Minister and the Prime Minister. People from 3 different planets were managing one country very well, harmoniously, but the World Bank director was totally confused. He thought, which of these planets represents Malaysia? And I was there.
I see. Yeah, it's very interesting when you mentioned about the libraries with the 2-week restriction to hand back the books, right? Because I remember when we were in school also we had the program Nilam, where we need to write down all the books that we read, and it's some sort of encouraging the students to also read the book. Yeah. Okay, all right. So from the dialogues that you heard from the thin wall and the facts from the article, so it's in between fact and the gossip, right?
Yeah.
So you also mentioned in one of your reviews about you like to write faction instead of fiction, because there's this one review from Prestige interview that you did in 2003. Non-fiction writing restricts you. You cannot tell the truth. People want to be featured as saints. Writing fiction liberates you. Can you explain a little bit more about that?
Sure. You see, first I wrote a draft memoir. But the trouble with that is that I had to say embarrassing things about my relatives and my friends. One of them drank too much. Another one borrowed money and didn't return it. So if you put it in a memoir, it's facts. People say, if you just whisper in my ears, okay, how can you put it in print? You're talking about my father, my uncle, how can? You know, we are Asians, we don't wash dirty linen in public, we wash in private. How can you say all these things about my uncle and my aunt and my grandmother and all that tablet? You know, so I couldn't be frank in non-fiction. But in fiction, I combined 3 different characters, my schoolmaster, my neighbor, my uncle, into one character. So that character is complex, is composite, and he has many facets. And most Malaysians don't read. The few that read non-fiction or self-help books. Okay? So if I were to reach them, I thought the way would be to write actual historical events. In other words, historical facts told via stories. So I call it historical fiction. Then you can reach people who only read non-fiction. I'm not sure if they're going to get any help, self-help, but at least they can learn our modern history all in one book. British Malaya, Japanese occupation, and early years after independence in one book. So that's the explanation for writing historical fiction.
Nice.
True life events of our history, but told via stories. Because if you look at the early cavemen, that's what they did. They sat in their cave with a little fire and they told each other stories, or they painted stories.
Yeah, on the wall.
So
right?
storytelling may be the oldest profession in the world. We told stories. So I'm continuing in that noble tradition of telling stories.
That's good, interesting. Or maybe I can open up the floor to a question from our audience. Anyone? Okay, we have one over here. Yeah. So we could get a mic for you. Yeah.
Thank you so much for a very entertaining session. Just to set the record straight, I'm not an American. I'm from Scotland.
Oh, okay.
Also an author. So my questions to you: which of the story or stories are you most proud of, and why?
Okay, I should say that these 15 stories are like my children. So as a parent, you shouldn't favor one child.
That's a lot of children.
Yes, a lot of children. So as a parent, you shouldn't favor one child over the other. But I can tell you about some stories that had a longer history. Even though they're short stories, they have long history. Take the first story, Victoria and a Kimono. You are from Scotland. It was first published in Ireland for the Fish International Story Prize, and they had 1,450 entries from all over the world. And the editor chose my story, Victoria and a Kimono. So it has an international origin. After that, Penguin wanted to have a project. They wanted to publish the best stories ever written in Singapore and Malaysia over the last 50 years. So they then published a book called The Merlion and the Hibiscus. The Merlion representing Singapore and the Hibiscus representing Malaysia. And the judges chose Victoria and a Kimono as one of the stories published by Penguin, republished because it had already been published in Ireland. It was republished by Penguin in The Merlion and the Hibiscus for the second time. And then when I was approached by Epigram publishers of Singapore and London, I said I'd like to include Victoria and a Kimono as the first story because it has such a long history. Plus it's set in the Victoria Institution where I spent the happiest days of my life. So it had sentimental and other reasons for Victoria and a Kimono, for example. Does that answer your question? Thank you. Sorry for the grave mistake, for mistaking a Scotsman for an American. I hope you weren't insulted. Okay.
Okay. All right. So let's go deep into the story. For the book, right? When Dato wrote the 15 stories, it's mainly centered around the Jaffna Tamil community in Malaya. So I just want to know, why was this your inspiration, or how does this influence you to write the 15 stories?
Okay, no, the Jaffna Tamils, they are a minority in Malaysia, in Singapore, anyway, even in Sri Lanka, they were minority. But they work extremely hard. I've never seen anybody, I'm myself a Jaffna Tamil, but I've never seen anybody work as hard as the Jaffna Tamils. They just work all the time. My father worked in the government, and he worked so hard, this was during the British time, that he was awarded an MBE for being the most hardworking clerk in the entire government. And he became clerk, chief clerk, then OA. OA is the chief of all the chief clerks. And the only one above them is either Malay royalty or the British. He was the highest a clerk could go. And he was so proud. In a whole year, he never took vacation leave. He thought that was a source of great pride. Today, they think, what a crazy old guy this fellow was. But those days, it was a source of great pride. I never took leave. I just worked all the time. And I had a neighbor, they were very close family friends. And he felt sorry that my father never went on holiday. He didn't know what is the meaning of the word holiday. So he said, Mr. Murgesu, you've been working in the land office. I want to buy a property in Port Dickson. So can you come with me and advise me? But actually he was plotting to take my father on a holiday to PD. So come and advise me which property to buy in PD. And he tricked my father into going on a holiday to PD by saying, I want to buy property there. He was such a workaholic. And he came from a poor family. And he was very highly principled. My mother was much better off than him. He said, I won't take a cent from my wife's or her family. Every bit of rice we eat will be the rice that I earn to buy. My mother, on the other hand, came from a well-off family, and she was full of humor. People would say, this Mrs. Murgesu, avoid her at funerals. So they say, why should we avoid her at funerals? Will she make you cry loudly? Worse than that. What could be worse than crying loudly in a funeral? Laughing loudly. She will make you laugh at the funeral. I'll give you an example. You know, unlike the Muslims who accept it's the will of God, somebody dies. These Hindus will protest, God, why did you call him so early? He wasn't ready, he hasn't finished his work, and you already call him. And there was this lady, she was weeping at the funeral and say, you built such a big house, and now I'm going to live in it alone. You have died before we could live in this house together. And my mother would say, instead of mourning that her husband is dead, she's bragging how big her house is. So the rest of us are crying, not because the husband died, because how small our house is compared to her big house. So we are crying. Our house so small. That's why we are crying. So everybody will laugh out loud. So they say, avoid this lady. She'll make you laugh at funerals. And my father was deadly serious. He woke us up at 4 in the morning to study. You're a minority, you better study. So we all studied 4 o'clock in the morning. But the moment he went to work, the moment he closed the gate to go out, my mother would mimic him and make fun of him. How he smoked his churut, how he hitched his sarong, how he walked up and down. She made such fun of him that we were able to enjoy both sides. The seriousness of my father, who made us work hard and never expect anything free, work for it. And my mother, who spoilt us rotten. Each of us would have a different breakfast. We ate like kings because my mother was a great cook. And the peculiar thing, we were the poorest in the neighborhood. But all the rich kids would come and eat in our house because my mother was a better cook than all those rich mothers. And sometimes the parents would come to our house at meal times and say, rice time is the right time to come here. Because my mother was a great cook. And some mothers, the children won't eat their own food. They'll come by the back door kitchen, what they cooked, and ask my mother to say, Mr. Murugesu, you say you cooked, then my children will eat. They only want to eat your cooking. So I found that food was a great leveler. We were the poorest, but all the richie poos came to our house because of my mother's cooking. And the other thing, her humor. They enjoyed her jokes. So I found food and humor were great levelers. If you were poor, if you could cook well or you had humor, you boleh naik pangkat lah. Be treated as an equal by all these tauques and tycoons and everything.
That's a good tips. And yeah, I could see how humor is translated well in your writing because you have the wittiness in the occasions that you describe in your book. So my next question would be, while you were writing all these stories, right? So what are the interesting things that you uncovered while you were capturing all the little details of your history and or your experience?
Okay, there are many things. One is, when I was writing, I found that when you're in the middle of your writing, your characters develop a life of their own. You know, say you are writing, planning to take your character to Penang. He says, no, I'm going to Johor. And you find your hand is moving with the character. So the characters, like children, they develop a life, a personality of their own.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the most exciting secrets about writing. That if you keep writing, your characters develop a life of their own. And some people say that being creative is one of the highest forms of existence. That you don't just copy the status quo, you're not Xerox machine, you know. You're just copying what is already there. But you're creating something that was never there before. That maybe even artificial intelligence may not be able to do that one thing that human beings can do. You can create something that never existed before. So that's very exciting.
The beauty of it.
The other thing is, you asked earlier about the Jaffna Tamil community. I mean, I told you about their hard work. You take, for example, in Singapore, they had 2 non-Chinese deputy prime ministers. And the Jaffna Tamils are less than 0.1% of the population of Singapore. Both those deputy prime ministers were Jaffna Tamils. Rajaratnam and now Tharman Shanmugaratnam, who was deputy prime minister, and he stood against two very credible Chinese candidates, and yet they chose him by a huge majority to be the president of Singapore. Because he worked so hard. He's exceptionally hardworking. When I was seconded from the PTD in the treasury to Petronas, my boss Dato Rastam Hadi, who is himself a superstar, he's from a kampung in Malacca. He was the entrance scholar in mathematics in the University of Singapore. That's how bright he was. And when he introduced me to the staff of Petronas heads of division meeting, he said, "This is Shan, my workhorse. You got any work, you give it to him. He'll finish it." So I was known as a workhorse, which is what the Jaffna Tamils are known as. They're not known as very smart or anything, but they work. They're workhorses, so I was known as a workhorse. So I was quite interested. These workhorses, what are their weaknesses? What are their foibles? What makes them tick? You know, for example, a Jaffna Tamil mother, her dream is for her daughter to marry a medical doctor. We have a medical doctor here. So, dream of any Jaffna Tamil mother, her daughter must marry a medical doctor. How about Prime Minister second lah, but medical doctor first choice. You know, so they had this hierarchy where the highest was a medical doctor. When I was a kid, I carried a little bag to school, and on that bag I wrote there Dr. Shan, because that's the highest anybody wants to be, a doctor. I didn't realize that I'll only get a Panadol serving PhD and not a medical doctor. But that was the aspiration of the Jaffna Tamils, to be a medical doctor. And they are quite conscious of hierarchy, because the harder you work, the more you achieve, and they worship hard work. They thought hard work was the greatest thing a person could do.
Yeah, I can attest to that, because we were discussing all the questions that I want to ask at this particular session. Dato Shan was texting me late at night, and then early in the morning, I think 5:30, I received a text from him also.
You're lucky you got it at 5:30, I got up at 4. I gave you 1.5 hours grace. Sleep a bit longer.
Yeah, okay. So maybe another question from the floor. Anyone? Yes, we have a gentleman over there.
Is there a plot or a character that
Sorry?
is there a plot or character dynamics that give you a different?
Sorry, I didn't get the first part of your question.
Is there a plot that you wrote or a character you developed gave you a different interpretation or evolved interpretation after rereading from when you start writing it?
Brilliant, brilliant. I tell you, if people ask me about advice about writing, I say writing is rewriting. You know, Ernest Hemingway, I think Farewell to Arms, he rewrote the last page 39 times. Can you imagine? He's one of the world's greatest writers. He rewrote one page 39 times. So I'm a little puchi brat. So why don't I rewrite 390 times to match Ernest Hemingway? I mean, he spent his whole life writing. And to make sure his writing was short, he wrote standing. So you don't want to stand long, so you better get straight to the point. So he had that kind of discipline. So people may not realize, if a guy is sitting and staring out of the window, he's not being lazy, he's thinking what he's going to write next. My friend K.S. Maniam, who's one of Malaysia's leading writers, he would say every night before he went to sleep, he would stop half a sentence. He wouldn't finish the sentence. So while he's asleep, his subconscious is working, and he wakes up in the morning, he'll have a new way to finish that sentence. So the subconscious is an amazing thing. And the things that we dream about, I mean, people have written books, theses about dreams. It's an amazing factor in your writing. That's why creative writing, I think, is a great challenge. And it's one of the marvels of mankind. So writing, I would say, is rewriting. If I look at my first draft and the present version here, there's almost like two totally different stories. And I greatly value feedback. I think I write and then I send to a number of people for their comments. Even when I did my doctoral thesis, I showed to 6 different professors, even though I had one supervisor. I value feedback. I think feedback is so important, because you've got blinkers, you're only looking at what you wrote. Other people can see much different perspective of what you're writing. So I think my first lesson is writing is rewriting. Second, you need to read a lot. If you don't read, you're not conscious when you write something, it doesn't sound right. That awareness of this sentence doesn't sound right, doesn't sound real, comes because you've been reading a lot. Comes from all the masters who went on the journey before you. So you have to be humble and say, I learned from all the great writers who wrote before me. From Shakespeare to the great Nigerian writers, Chinua Achebe, Wole Soyinka, Chimamande Adichie, R.K. Narayan, V.S. Naipaul. There's many great writers. So much we can learn from them.
Yeah, that's really beautiful when you put it that way. Maybe another question from the floor. Okay.
Dato, you mentioned the stories were from your life experiences. So I was just wondering whether when you have finished writing your stories, were your family and relatives, were they able to identify themselves in the story? Or if not, what did you do to camouflage or hide who they were in the stories?
Okay, that's a brilliant question. Thank you. Oscar Wilde said, if there's one thing worse than being talked about, it's not being talked about. People think you're not even worth gossiping about. So, you're right. I had to combine a number of characters. As I said, my schoolmaster, my neighbor, my uncle were all combined into one character. So there are some people who said, this story you wrote is exactly the story of my parents. How come you copied their story? You didn't tell me. So there are many different reactions. Some are flattered, some are intrigued. So there's a range of reactions when you write stories. And some people say, your stories are so real. One guy wrote to me from Ohio and said, how come you knew so much stories about my family? And he lives out there in Ohio. He's an accountant. Another accountant told me, I don't read fiction. I only look at facts and figures. This fiction all fantasy. So I said, so I'm writing faction. So that's a brilliant question. But I'm saying there's a whole range of responses. Some are flattered, some are intrigued. Some want to know how you knew their family secrets and wrote this. Things that. But it's exciting. It's exciting to get the feedback, to read reviews. I greatly value feedback. And if any of you have any feedback on the reading or on the stories, you can send me a WhatsApp text or email. I greatly value feedback. Thank you very much. But did it answer your question? Thank you. Great question. You see, because this is Malaysian history, to a great extent I have to observe chronology. First, the British colonial period, then the Japanese occupation, then the early days of Tunku Rahman, then Tun Razak, and so forth. I had to, because it's history. At the same time, I didn't want to be a slave of history. I didn't want to say A happened after B and B happened after C and so forth. I also wanted to have themes. So you'll find in the middle of the book, there's a trilogy. The trilogy of 3 stories. One is a sequel to the other. The Barefoot Man from Malaya, Marriage and Mutton Curry, and Dodol for the Doctor are 3 sequels. One story grows into another. In fact, I first wrote it as one story. And one writer told me, there's so much packed into one story, why don't you spread it out? And so
Into
I spread
3.
it out into 3 stories. So there's a mixture, that's a great question. It's a mixture of chronology and theme. I had certain themes that I wanted to explore. For example, take the first story, Rasama. Her life's dream was to be a school teacher. But her husband, he was status conscious. And he said, if my wife goes to work to earn money, it means that I cannot afford to support her. Malu. She said, you cannot work for money. You can teach our neighbors' wives and all that because your English is better than them. But you cannot work for money, because if you work for money, it implies that I cannot support you. Now, her name is Rasama, it's R.A. The last character in the last story is Rani Taxis Away. I deliberately used the name which begins with R.A. from Rasama to Rani. And Rani Taxis Away happens just when Malaysia got Merdeka. So I'm saying, just as Malaysia got Merdeka, the women got their Merdeka. And Rani started off as a teacher. The dream of Rasama. So like Rani is like a reincarnation of Rasama. So I'm using symbols. At the same time I'm saying Malaysia became independent. We are not under colonial power. We're independent, and one of the signs of independence is that women are treated equal to men. They're not treated as inferior. In Rani, her mother consults her younger brother what she should do. She said, for God's sake, he's younger than me and you're consulting him about me? Yeah, he's male. Like, it's a fact of life that male are superior. So Rani challenges that. And she's already a teacher. And she says, she's part of Malaysia's independence. Before independence, we were told we were not ready. For Tuku Rahman said, we will fix a date, because you will never say we are ready for independence. We fix a date, August 31st. Whether we are ready or not, we will take independence. So that story has many layers to it, Rani Taxis Away, starting from Rasama wanting to be a teacher and Rani being a teacher.
From the first story until the end.
So I say it's a form of reincarnation. Rasama is reincarnated as Rani in independent Malaysia. Therefore, she's also independent with the country. So I'm playing with national level and family individual level together. That's a symbol.
Symbolism and the
Yeah.
very good approach to that. Okay, do we have additional question? Okay, from Aditi.
Thank you, Dato. I think reading the book is a different experience, and hearing you.
Which is worse?
I cannot compare. One is you immersing yourself, the other is you bringing characters to life. It was both equally enjoyable. I wanted to pick up the earlier thread that you were talking about using humor and food. I kind of picked up a very important social critique that you were bringing up through the book about issues of gender, caste, Brahmanical privilege, class, and also a different kind of a unity between the different races in the country. So I wanted to know, I mean, was using humor a tool in somehow bringing out the social critique in some of the characters? Like, for example, Rasma's character, I think the way you brought up the fact that she couldn't, the way her relationship with her husband, and also her dreams and aspirations and her family, was it a conscious choice of using humor in some of the things, in some of the characterizations that you were trying to build?
Thank you, that's a great question. Yes, it was a very conscious choice, because as I said, in my home, my mother used humor to enable herself, and there were 8 of us, those days families were large, 8 children, to cope with my deadly serious father. My aunt from Ceylon said, this Murgesu, humor is the work of the devil for him, because he never laughs. And my mother laughed all the time. So like if you take Shakespeare's tragedies, even in his most heavy tragedies, there's a section of comic relief. And the comic relief heightens the tragedy and lightens it as well. In the same way, my mother's humor enabled us to cope with the heavy hand of my father saying, study. 4 o'clock, study. And he memorized our report cards. He memorized our syllabus. My brother was studying in Imperial College in London. And my father's writing to him, according to your syllabus, you should be doing this. And are you ready for your exam on that day? And it was like parallel, because my father was writing about his exams and his syllabus. And he's writing, I'm very active with the socialist movement in Britain. I attended the Labour Party meeting and the Fabian Society. No reference to studies whatsoever. So there was these 2 parallel letters going on. My father, all about his syllabus in Imperial College and the date of his exam and what were his results. And I just attended a meeting with the Labour Party and they are in favour of independence for the colonies and, we are going to be independent. So the two parallel lines never met. And same with my mother. I think the one thing that my father and mother had in common were the 8 children. Because they were so different in personality. But my mother's humor made all the difference. If not for her humor, I think I would be a greater bore than I am now. It's her humor that makes me tolerable to people. So I think humor is a great thing.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, sir.
Yeah, please. This is a Jaffna Tamil medical doctor.
Who's not married?
How come? Too many choices.
I was fascinated about your family situation. How did your dad respond to your mother's humor? I mean, it always seems as though it's like a separate kind of life in that sense. But humor is so important to your mother. How did your dad respond to the laughter around him? Surely he would have found your mother funny. Maybe that was part of her attraction, don't you think? But he did not show it. Can you please explain the dynamic?
It's a mystery that has still not been solved. Sherlock Holmes tried, all the detectives tried, they haven't solved the mystery. But I think what happened was, most of the humor my mother didn't show my father. In front of him, she was very respectful. Yes, boss. Bole, boss. Sure, boss. Whatever you say, boss. But the moment he was out of her sight, she was a totally different person. So, but in front of him, she was very respectful. She prepared his meal. She bowed whatever he said. Yes, boss. Yeah, bole, boss. Yeah. But when he was away, she was a different personality. And my father, at first, his first secret he told her, she went and told everybody as a joke, his secret. So after that, he never confided in her. He confided in my sister, who was the opposite of my mother. If she knew a secret, she would never tell anyone. You could choke her to death, she won't. So my father confided in my sisters rather than in my mother. So it was like a parallel relationship. He working deadly, she being a master cook. People would come to our house. Right at the front, my father is at his desk reading and working. People would dash past him because he's serious. Go straight to the kitchen, see my mother cooking, eat, laugh, joke, and then run away without avoiding my father's because he might ask some serious question. You see. So it was a parallel universe and a parallel relationship. And they coexisted. He was very generous to her. When she wanted to go marketing, he would give her whatever money she wanted, and he worked so hard so that she could have a good material life and the children. For the children, he just wanted us to be educated. My mother wanted her to eat well and be happy. He wasn't interested in eat well and happy. Just, let me see your exam results, let me see your report card. That was his aim. So, we had two different regimes. One was eat well and be happy and laugh, and the other study hard or I'll whack you. Does that answer your question?
Somewhat. As you say, it's a mystery.
Yeah.
Unsolved mystery.
Yeah. But they were both very unselfish about the children. My father would sacrifice everything for the children. He would walk just to save on bus fare. Can you imagine? And the bus fare was 10 cents or 15 cents. He would walk to save on bus fare. And his shoes, the sole had worn out and you can see the socks inside. He worked so hard and he saved for his children. He had sisters who were living in Ceylon. He would, as a clerk, he saved and would send money for their education, for his sisters' children's education. And when my elder sister went to Ceylon, she saw my father's portrait with a garland in some houses. She said, "Why are you garlanding my father?" He said, "Because he paid for our school education. His sister's children, he paid for the education." To him, education was like God. You worship this God and you try to study as much as you can and as hard as you can. He had a brother in Ceylon. He brought him here, sent him to Singapore to study medicine. But the brother wasn't keen on medicine. So when my father went to visit him, the brother hid to hide from the fact that he wasn't studying medicine. But he made up. All his sons became doctors and all his daughters married doctors. So he made up for my father's ambition that his brother should study medicine. So I used to tease my uncle, you don't have to open a clinic or hospital all in your house. All the sons are doctors, all the daughters are married doctors. And one son-in-law opened a specialist clinic in Ampang just for orthopedic. Minimum of 9 orthopedic doctors. Because that was their passion, like medicine.
But do you think of this veneer of seriousness? Could you see a chink where there was tenderness towards your mother? Could you see that sometimes expressed?
Oh yeah.
And that's very touching when you see it.
Yes. Yes. There was. As I say, he was so hard on himself, walking to save bus fare. But for mother, unlimited. She could have as much money as she wanted to go shopping, to buy ingredients for food, to buy whatever. He was very generous with her.
What are words of tenderness, love? Would you express that to your mother?
I think not so demonstrative, but in being generous with her going shopping. She wanted to go on a holiday overseas. He said, yes, you go with your sister and all that. So he was generous in actions. Not a man of words, because he spoke very little. He was a man of very few words. Whereas my mother joked all the time. She was a woman of many words. So I have half and half.
Thank you so much.
It's one of the mysteries of life though.
Well, was that also your inspiration for one of the stories, Have Enough?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, all right. So maybe one last question. Yeah, from Kenny.
Hi, Dr. Shan. Just wondering, I think no one has ever asked this question before. I'm very interested by the title, Marriage and Mother Curry. Like, how did you came up with that and why?
That's a great question, I'll tell you. First, the word marriage. I don't refer to the narrow conventional sense of husband and wife. I'm saying marriage in the broader sense of the word, of all kinds of relationships. Like those days, there were men who were married to their job. Like my father, I say, he never took a day's vacation leave. So these people, their marriage was to their job. Their job was everything. And when they retired, they were lost because their job was everything. It happens now in Japan. The men who go to work early in the morning and they come back late in the evening, and the children are already asleep. They only see the children the weekend. So when the husband retires, they don't know what to say to the wife because the whole time the job was his obsession. And some people even separate because they finally find, I've been living with a stranger but he's had a job. But after 30 years he's going to be home for good. What are we going to do? What are we going to talk about? We're strangers. So, marriage refers to all kinds of relationships. Formal, informal, romantic, non-romantic, all that. And mutton curry too, mutton's the one meat that people of all religion can eat. It's not beef or pork or something which various religions forbid. So mutton's like neutral territory. But I also mean it to refer to all forms of food. It just stands for any kind of food. So some people ask me, I'm a vegetarian, can I read your book? I say, yeah, as long as you don't bite and eat the book, it's okay.
Okay, yeah. And I think when we think about it, it can be also quite philosophical and how it attracts people. Because your cover is very attractive. I'm quite a visual person. So when I see that, oh, okay, this piques an interest in me. I'll just take this. Marriage and mutton curry. Okay, all right. Maybe last question to the aspiring writers out there.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, because we don't know who are among us who will eventually write a short story or even a novel. So I would like to get a few words of inspiration from Dato Shan on how you capture the essence of a great story and what makes a great story, really.
Well, I think firstly, I think brevity is a challenge. You know, Mark Twain once said, "I've no time to write you a short letter, so I'm writing you a long one." That the challenge is to say what you have to say. That's why I go for short story rather than novels. I find to sprint, to give us an aspect of life within one story is a big challenge. Second, you look at great writers like, say, O. Henry, he always had surprise endings. And I'm very fascinated by having stories with surprise endings, that it adds value to your reader. That's why I say to anyone who reads my book, please don't read the end of the story first, read from the beginning to the end, because there's a surprise ending. That's another big thing. Say, for example, in poetry, I like the Japanese haiku because it's just 3 lines. It's a challenge to say that in 3 lines. And you asked me, I told you that although my entire education was English medium, to this day I write my sajak in Malay. I write my prose in English, I write in Malay, and then I translate. You asked me if I could read out one of my poems in Malay. I will now.
Okay. So yesterday we had a dry run of this session. So that's when Dato Shan shared that he actually wrote some Malay poems. So
all my poems are in Malay. Then I translate into English. I will read one and see what you think. It's called Bomb Nuclear. Fatty, fatty, bomb, bomb. Curi, curi, jagong. Mata, mata, tangkap. Masuk rumah pasong. Nuclear, nuclear, bomb, bomb. Hancur, hancur dunia. Kuasa, kuasa besar. Siapa tangkap mereka? Now the English version. Fatty, fatty, bomb, bomb. Always stealing maize corn. The police caught this person, threw him in the prison. Nuclear, nuclear bomb. Crushing, crushing our earth. Super, super powers. Who can catch them? If you want, I have another short one. Okay. Pertemuan rohani. Seorang Malaysia bertemu roh meminta 3 cita. Cita tak boleh, aku bukan pari-pari. 3 soalan boleh. Soalan-soalannya. Kau apa? Kau makan apa? Bagi nombor 4 ekor. A Malaysian meets a ghost. Asks for 3 wishes. No wishes, I'm not a fairy. Only 3 questions. The questions: what race are you? What food you eat? What number for 4-digit lottery? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dato. So I'll pass back the floor to Anna, and then we will continue with the rest of our session.
Yes, thank you, Amirul.
Thank you.
Let's give a hand to Amirul and Dato.